I am Mackenzie Luters, and this is my project proposal presentation. This is presented for Curriculum 7005 for the University of Louisiana Monroe. Before we get to my research question, I wanted to give a little background information to help you figure out a little bit about what I was interested in and what led to the research question development. It has been documented that students that feel connected to and are supported by their teachers, administrators, or other adult school personnel have a higher chance of staying in school and staying out of trouble. We have very diverse populations of students to serve, yet the ethnic makeup of our teachers is dominated by white teachers. On the left, you'll see a pie chart provided by Husser et al. In 2020 of the percentages of white public school teachers in 2017-2018, just a few years ago. And as you can see, nearly 80% of the public school teachers in America were white, with other ethnicities very lowly represented. So given this information, I wanted to know, due to the lack of ethnic diversity seen in teachers across the public school system, how do our ethnic minority students perceive their relationship with their predominantly white teachers? Does it matter to them? Does it not? I feel like a lot of times we, as educators, make assumptions about what we think students will think or see or feel. So I really wanted to dive in to that gap between diversity in our students and diversity in our educators. And how do the students feel about that gap? So putting this specifically into a research question, I came up with, how do ethnic minority students in a low SES or socioeconomic status high school perceive relationships with their predominantly white teachers? I think that it's important to note that I included the piece about low SES high school, and I did that because research has shown that low SES high schools or low SES schools are the places that you're going to find the largest number of ethnic minority students. So I'm focusing there just for the best chance possible to find a large group of ethnic minority students. Now, because I include the terminology low SES in my research question, I felt it important to identify here what makes a school low SES. So determine what constitutes a low SES school is not something that's set in stone, but when educators are talking about it or policymakers are talking about their determinations of low, medium, or high SES schools, there are three measures that appear to arise again and again in the discussion. They are income of the household, occupations of the adults living in that household, and their education level. Now, previous literature has shown that free and reduced lunch qualification is often a good mark of low SES, as it relates to income and is directly dependent on the household income. So that's a good way to kind of immediately measure the income level of a house. So I would focus on schools that enroll over 50% of students that are considered first-generation college students, because that would tell me the education level in their house, as well as over 50% that are on free and reduced lunches, as that would tell me the income in the house. Occupation is often included, but that one is much harder to gauge because, as we know, just your title or just your occupation doesn't always give a fair assessment of what that person is getting paid in their income. So how would I choose the school? There are a few requirements for a school to be considered for this study. It must serve 9 through 12 students. If it serves 6 through 12 or maybe 7 through 12 students, that is fine, but my focus would be on those grades 9 through 12 students. It must be considered low SES based on the factors that I listed and discussed on the previous slide, and its teaching staff must consist of at least 50% white teachers. Now, this is because we are focused on those ethnic minority students and their relationships with white teachers. There are very obviously schools that employ other ethnicities as the majority of their teaching population, so it is important that for this study, the teaching staff of the school be over 50%, or what I consider a majority, of white teachers. How are participants chosen? So this is just a very brief overview, doesn't include any protocol or detailed steps, but just a very brief overview of how I would choose the participants. First, I would send out a survey to teachers to determine who would be comfortable with my presence in their room. I will be in their room, as you will see, doing some classroom observations. So I think that the first place that I would need to start is with the classroom teachers. There would be no point in getting students on board and willing if the teachers would not allow me in their classrooms to observe. Second, I would send home a letter to parents explaining my study and gather information on those that would be willing and interested in participating. So if I had a few teachers that said, sure, you're welcome in my room, then I would focus my letters home to the students that were in those classes. And lastly, I would narrow it down and then meet with students and their parents, especially if they're under the age of 18, to provide a detailed outline and explanation of the process, and then of course answer any questions that they may have. So that last step is really focused on the details, what I'm hoping to accomplish, what I will and will not expect from their students, and what data will and will not be made public, and how I can protect their confidentiality. I have 3 ways to collect data and observe this relationship. The first starts with a classroom observation. I would observe students in a classroom with a white teacher 1 hour a day, 1 time a week for 4 weeks. Just kind of really seeing those daily interactions that happen, those things that might not come out in an interview that they don't realize are happening. And I do need to note here that in my full design proposal, I did make a note that if it was possible, I would be interested in not only observing the students with a white teacher, but then observing them, if possible and logistically possible, with a teacher that was non-white, to see if there were any differences or things that I would pick up between the two. Secondly, I would do an interview and use a semi-structured interview format to confidentially interview the student. And last, document analysis. I would like to look at work previously completed by the student to gain a broader understanding of them as a whole student. So things that I didn't see in the classroom observation, things that I wasn't told in the interview, but maybe would show on their work, and maybe this work occurred long before they knew there was a research study or I was even in the picture. Again, just to gain a broader understanding of them as a whole student, as a whole person, beyond just what I see in my time there and hear from their interview. Maintaining confidentiality is important, and here's how I plan to achieve that. In my classroom observations, I will not have my focus on just the student I'm observing, but on all students, so as not to reveal the identity of the students to others. It will be obvious why my presence in the room is occurring, as all students will have received the same letters, with many of them presumably opting out of the research study. But I will focus on the classroom as a whole, obviously keeping an eye out for the specific student that agreed to be in the study, but my eyes will not just be located on that one student and their interactions with the teacher. I will use pseudonyms in my notes, and for interviews, those will take place off of school property in a neutral location and in a safe space for the student to speak freely. I don't want them to take place on school property so that other students that maybe are there after school see them walking into a room. I will allow the student and or their parents to choose the location that they feel most comfortable with that is away from the school. And as for the student work, the document analysis, I will ask the teacher to see all student work because I don't want the teacher to know the student that I'm observing, because I don't want that to change how the teacher interacts with, deals with, talks with, and establishes a connection with the student. So if I ask to see all student work and maybe just look over one student, then it'll be less obvious. And for data confidentiality, the data will be stored on a personal computer as well as on a personal flash drive, again using pseudonyms. The data will be destroyed 5 years after the date of collection. To ensure credibility of my findings, I plan to enlist the help of at least one other teacher not employed by the school being studied and not involved in the data gathering process to independently reach conclusions and determine findings from the data collection. We can then get together, discuss our findings, or discuss areas where we don't agree as to what was discovered and found, and this will help minimize bias and also provide a check of my work. Obviously, this is a brief overview and much more detailed in my design synopsis, but just to get a basic understanding of ensuring credibility, this is what I plan to do. So as with any research study, we are hoping to address a research gap and to inform or help others. So who do I hope that this research study helps? I think that it could help inform and reiterate the push to recruit minority teachers to the profession, as well as to help to educate white teachers on how to build meaningful and authentic relationships with their diverse student population. So to conclude, this study focuses on how ethnic minority students perceive relationships with their white teachers, and hopefully will shed some light onto the lack of diversity in the public school teaching profession. Perhaps as we understand more, we can address the need for more diversity of teachers, as well as educating white teachers on how to build more authentic relationships with all students. As a teacher that fits into the mold and the statistics seen, a white middle-class female teacher, I really hope that we can uncover some truths and shed some light on something that I believe needs to be addressed going forward in the field of education.